Hey, how is everyone? It's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual, and this is number 110. Got a letter for you. This is an oldie but a goodie, sent to me by an anonymous person on the Tumblrs, and they wanted me to know, hello, since you are a widely read asexual activist, I was wondering if you could highlight the fact that hypoactive sexual desire disorder is not a way to put asexual people into therapy, but a way to help people with HSDD. I have it. I fear that activism against this diagnosis will prevent people from accessing medical support. HSDD is very different from asexuality, and people who have it used to feel sexual. Thank you. My reply: thanks for this. Yes, absolutely. Hypoactive sexual desire disorder is a real thing, and based on what I remember from learning about it when I was a psychology minor, it is distinct from asexuality for a few reasons. It usually represents a change, i.e., the person used to desire sex and experience sexual attraction in a more typical way, but stopped doing so. It generally can't be diagnosed if the person experiencing it isn't distressed by it. Though I will note that some people whose sexuality is fluid or inspired by something else in their lives may also comfortably identify as asexual later in their lives after identifying as a different orientation before. And it is possible to be distressed by your orientation without it being a clear sign that you have HSDD. Unfortunately, sometimes things can get a little muddy because it is actually very hard to tell sometimes whether a person's lack of desire for sexual contact, sexual arousal, or sexual attraction is part of a dysfunction or if it's part of who they are. Most people who are not asexual have an intrinsic desire for sex or an intrinsic experience of sexual attraction. And sometimes pressure on asexual people to feel this way makes us distressed that we don't have some of those desires. In other words, being distressed that you can't want sex or find people sexy can be very complicated. Pressure to find happiness through sexual relationships or fear of being abnormal can make someone think they want to have these experiences even if they don't intrinsically want to. And do I want this intrinsically is anything but simple to answer. Because of this, we need to trust people with their feelings. If you, the person who sent me this, feel that your desires have changed in a way that's not you, and you need mental health services to get back to yourself again, to get in touch with the parts of you you know are there and consider important to your identity and happiness, then that is a very good way of approaching it. And by clinical standards, the HSDD diagnosis fits perfectly. But since there is so much negativity surrounding asexuality for some people, it is always possible to be labeled erroneously by someone in the person's life, by their therapist, or even by themselves. And we can't ignore that there are people in this world who use diagnoses like weapons to pressure people into accepting a normal that isn't them. I have literally had people tell me I have this disorder and that it doesn't matter if I'm happy being disordered because I'm still broken no matter what I think. Anyone who weaponizes diagnosis should not be trusted. But yes, in the ACE community, sometimes those of us who have never desired those experiences or had those needs will underestimate their importance to a person who considers them central and definitive. And we do need to respect that for some people, being their desired selves sometimes requires help reconnecting with a sexual orientation that sort of abandoned them. HSDD is not mythical. It's just sometimes misused. And we've been the ones bearing the brunt of that misuse. Opting for individual-led therapy and diagnostics and life experiences is the best thing to do. And I will also say that sometimes I receive comments from people about how I'm being irresponsible by encouraging people to accept asexuality when it might be an illness. I mean, if you have spent any time out as an asexual person or trying to share yourself with anyone in your life, you have probably heard comments like these, unless you got very lucky And it's just very common for people to say that you have a psychological or physical problem. And as an activist, I have definitely had people tell me, how do you know you're not actually hurting people or encouraging them not to pursue therapy that they actually need? And I have even gotten letters from people who realized later that they were not asexual, but used to identify as asexual and realized they had a problem and tried to blame me and other people like me for it, saying, I thought that this was who I was, and if you guys hadn't been out there giving me this easy answer, then maybe I would have figured myself out sooner. But here's the thing. Asexuality is a real thing. It represents the experience of millions of people. It's not fake. And those of us who do activism, we're trying to help ourselves. We're trying to help our community. We're here for the people that will find our activism useful, and we can't cut back on our activism on the off chance that somebody mistakes themselves for asexual and is led astray. We can't stop helping ourselves because somebody might think that they're asexual and be wrong. The resources still need to be out there. And that's why another thing that I encourage, in addition to accepting asexuality if it describes you, is to pay attention to your inner life, to pay attention to your desires, to have conversations, to talk to people different from you and people who are the same as you, and continue to ask questions, continue to keep your mind open. And that's not the same thing as saying you should always be looking for a different answer, because I do have a really hard time with that perspective, that people seem to think being open-minded is the same thing as actively trying to find a different answer if you're asexual, as if being asexual is just the worst answer. It's always the nothing answer. It can't really be the answer. And I have a responsibility to keep looking for a partner that'll excite me or a sexual experience I could enjoy, when actually that's the thing that has made me the least happy in my pursuit of happiness. Just having people insist that it must be something else, or that I have a responsibility to keep pursuing things that other people want me to want. So if they're really that concerned with my happiness or any asexual person's happiness, they probably need to think about what it does to us if we're always being questioned and always being encouraged to keep trying to be something else, anything else. So that said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a diverse world and that there are medical and psychological disorders that can have lack of sexual interest or lack of sexual engagement or even attraction experiences that are atypical as part of their symptom set. It tends not to be the only one, but it would definitely be irresponsible of me to say that those things don't exist, or to suggest that it's more likely always to be asexuality than something that's been distressing you or making you feel like maybe you are sick. There's nothing wrong with pursuing medical/psychological avenues. If you're worried about them, if someone in your life is worried about them, if someone is telling you that you have symptoms that are consistent with some disorder, it's not insulting. It's not like a betrayal of asexuality to consider that you might have these things. It is always possible. And I don't want to downplay the seriousness of that, because there are some serious disorders that can sometimes, especially lack of sex drive, can be a symptom. But I think that it would just be very wrong to say that if I don't emphasize that as being more likely or if I don't encourage every asexual person who relates to asexual dialogues to primarily consider themselves sick first. That would not be appropriate. I mean, unless you're experiencing a big change or you're experiencing multiple symptoms that you've looked it up and you see that there's a bunch of symptoms that you're experiencing. Yeah, it's definitely something that I would absolutely encourage people to access professionals' opinions. And of course, it only becomes problematic when you're pressured into continuing to try to find medical or psychological, quote, solutions to something that to us is not a problem. So that's where I stand with that. As far as comments go on this video, I would be really interested to hear from people who maybe have had experiences with being tested for some of these things, people who have found out that they do have HSDD or they have something similar, a sexual aversion disorder, or maybe they've had issues with like a pituitary tumor or something like that, you know, like the infamous House MD episode had somebody who thought he was asexual until he was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor. It's a real thing. Yes, those things exist. They're also way, 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 way rarer than asexuality is. And as much as we harp on how we're only maybe 1% of the population, if some surveys are to be believed, 1% is still a lot of people. Like I said, it's millions of people. So there are obviously lots of rare disorders out there that, you know, can be conflated or mistaken for asexuality if you're not watching for signs and signals. But again, this is another reason why there needs to be more education, less shame, and more encouragement for us to be in touch with ourselves and our communities and to have these conversations. So that is where I will end this one. And yeah, I'm really interested to see what some of you will put in the comments. All right, thanks for watching. See you next time.